Hello and welcome to this video. I'm going to show you how some of the models were made from the wave functional collapse videos, and in this video I'm going to focus on making the wooden crates. So here in Unreal I have some wooden crates, some props that are made out of wood, and these are all made in Houdini. Each of these props are actually built out of another modular set, so I only had to make these 6 models, and then I can combine them together to make a crate, a bigger crate, a bucket, a barrel. So this is a quite useful set to then create multiple models. So this is then for creating multiple different props for my scene, so I could save time and spend more time on the wave function collab tool. So I only had to make a very small amount. Then here in Houdini, let's create a geometry network. And in this geometry network, we're going to start out with our planks. So I'm going to take a box and we're going to scale this to a bigger plank. So we can, for example, scale this like this. So this is our first big plank. Then what I want to do on this is I want to add a bevel, but I want to add a random beveling. For this random bevel to work we need more topology. So your box needs to be on polygon mesh, and then we can here go to the axis divisions, and with the middle mouse button we then can increase this number. If I now would play around a noise, attribute noise, we can add a noise on this model. So each point will have a different value based on this noise. So now I want the 1D noise, which is just a grayscale, and I want to also use the remapping. So we have values from 0 to 1. And then we can play around also with the size here. So you can just tweak that when you want. And I'm going to use this then in a bevel. And I'm also going to change this from color to the name P-scale. So here let's place down the bevel node, polybeveling. So in here let's set a distance. Something like this. You can always increase this if you want to. Now we want to set this from no scaling to scaling by attribute, and by default is going to look at the P scale. Now also important here is to go to the exclusions and enable ignore flatten edges. And now as a result we have this random bevel based on this noise, which is then here very useful. So in this case I'm thinking about increasing the distance. So you see, if you do this too much, it might conflict with the already existing geometry. So I'm gonna have to be careful. So in this case, I think I might go something like this. Then after this, I'm going to voxel this model. So this is a node from the lab tools. Then in here, I'm going to disable bound box relative. And I'm going to use custom resolution. So I can define how much polygons are used. And I'm going to start out with, let's say 0.2. And if I hold middle mouse button on the node, I can get the information. I think I can go higher. So let's say maybe 1. That's a bit better. You can even go way more if you want to. And then we can also go project to original and we can apply some smoothing. So based on what you would like, we can have a lot of smoothing. So right now I did a lot of smoothing. Then comes an interesting part, and I'm going to create this wood structure on this model, and I'm going to use an attribute FOB for this. So attribute FOB, plug it in over here, and in here we have an option for noise. So in this case I want to use the vines node. This will return the most wood-like structure. So I'm going to fill in my position here, and you can, for example, plug this in the color just for visualization. So you can see this is now going on, and of course we are going to play around with this value. I'm going to set this here first to cylindrical, and I'm going to play around with where these offsets are and how the sizes are going. So this is sort of the offset position where it starts. Then I want to have the direction here from the Y. I want also something more stylized looking, and I'm gonna get rid first of the noise before I'm gonna further fill in values. That will make it more clear. So here at the bottom we have this noise amplitude, and let's set this to a very low value, and you can see that now the noise is less gone and we see more of these lines going on. So if I would put this then to, let's say, 1.3, so we have a little bit noise but not too much, that could be working. Then we can further play around here then with these values. So if you think you still have too much noise, we can then lower this, so we almost have perfect lines, and now we can do some noise. And you can see here also the cylindrical option working, and because of the offset, the cylindrical way is starting here. So if you would put this to 0 and 0, you would see that now it's starting perfectly in the center. But you can, for example, tweak this so it starts, for example, here. And you can then further play around with some of these values and just like think about how many of these lines you want per wooden side. Now also useful here is on the side, you actually have an option to promote the parameter. So if you're going to click on each of them, we can then use these parameters outside of the VOP network. So here I exposed all of them, so we have a lot of control. So as you can see now all these settings are here at this level of the node, which is very useful. And what I'm going to do here, now it's stored in the color, but I want to actually have this in my geometry so it can be baked in my low poly. I'm going to use the node called Displace along normal. Place the node here. We need to displace the points, of course. We can also plug in the normal direction, and our amount is the amount of my veins. Now this new point is then used here, and it will probably look like this. So we're gonna have to go here and lower some of the scaling so it's more subtle. So you can see you can play around with this, and we would just want to have like a little bit going on. So I don't have that much topology to have extreme details, but for the main structure it's kind of working to get some of that feeling in there. You can also just delete the color to see how much it is actually doing. And I think this is okay for now. We can of course also expose this value, promote scaling value, and now we have here at the bottom the scale for this. Now we can then here fine tune this as well. So if you're not happy with what it was, we can then start here fine tuning some values. So here I tweaked some values. So this is a more different looking one with like less noise and bigger shapes. So you're gonna have to find what you want. Of course, you can increase this network and add more features to make it even better. But in this case, I'm just going to keep it simple because from this node already does a good job at creating the base structure that I want. But you can definitely tweak this network until what you would like to see. So as this is a quite interesting setup, I've made my own node for this. So I have a node called wood grains, and every time I place this, I have the same settings actually that I just had from the vein nodes. So if I would plug this in over here, I'm basically having this very similar effect of what I actually made here. If you have an interesting setup, make your own node out of it so you don't have to make this from scratch all the time. If you're interested in more information about this technique, about using these VOPs to create noise and structure, I can recommend you also watching this video, which does a very similar approach and goes also a bit more in depth on a few more things here and there to create it even more interesting and better. So I can definitely recommend this video as well. It gives some interesting information to further push this. Then here back in Houdini, I have my first plank ready, and this is still a very tweakable setup. So we can, for example, go to our Baffle, and I can push my Baffle even more if I want to. And at a certain point, we're gonna create shapes like this. So this might be too extreme. So I can also easily start to make this larger if I want to. So now I have a setup that I can just copy paste and create bigger planks. So in this case, let's copy paste this network. And I'm going to change the main shape. So let's focus on the main shape now. And I want to create a plank that is like this, but just thinner. So I will just do this. And let's see if my bevel works. So in some cases it's not working that nicely. So I'm actually thinking of decreasing the number of polygons here in this side, so it has more room for the bevel. So here in the first value, let's just maybe go to 4. We can of course increase the other value maybe like this. And let's see how well that works. So that's a bit better. And I'm gonna lower my beveling amount here. Then the mesh is getting voxeled, so that's looking nice. Then we apply these wood structures. That's okay, but I think we can tweak this better. Maybe create some more. Play around with the direction of this, as you can see. And play around how this is going. So maybe in this case you could, for example, go to the more linear way. So we can create this structure. So this is how it looks. I also find it more interesting to actually have no extra lines here on the x-axis. We'll just set it to 2, and this will result in pushing the bevel a bit more. So I get rid of this corner actually here, and this is getting then beveled. So that just makes it a bit nicer, I think. We can also here play around with some of the bevel scaling. So we can get a smoother version here, or we can get more randomness in there. And now I'm going to make the third and the last plank. So copy the models again, going back here. And now what I want is a more broken version. I'm going to switch here to the right camera view, and I'm going to just drag these points and going to grab them down like this. Something like this. We could also click this edge and maybe drag it like that. Can do the same here, play around with these edges. Then we probably have to tweak the bevel here. Or this can actually be fine like it is now. I think it's okay. Then doing voxel and then the grains. And it actually did a pretty good job here. I think this is okay. Maybe let's increase the intensity here a bit. I think this is okay. So we have a more broken version of the plank. So these are all my plank models. I can merge them together. Now also when I merge them together, they are overlapping. So I'm going to place down transform. And let's just move them away. So in this case, probably like 1 unit. Then another transform here as well. And then here 2 units. I think actually 1 unit was probably too low, so let's just go for 2 and 4 units. So now I could use this as my high poly, and now I can also make a low poly. So here are my wooden parts. Now I'm going to make the metal parts. So we have the high poly for wood. Now I'm going to make these metal parts. I'm going to start out here with a basic cube. So this cube, I'm going to basically grab here this structure. And we're just going to tweak it until we have a cube back again. So let's set this back to 1. And I'm going to lower this divisions to 5 and maybe lower the amount of noise and just play around with it until I get something interesting. So that was an easy part. Then I'm going to create that round circle that can be used for a metal ring. So I'm going to start out with a circle line. Going to place this on the ZX plane. Then going to use this in polygon mode. So now it's a real polygon. And I can increase this to, for example, maybe 100. Because when I voxel this mesh, it's going to give a better result. So right now we're focusing more on creating mid polys and high polys, and low poly will be taken care of later. So from here, I'm going to use the sweep node. So sweep, and here with the new sweep node, we can then here go, for example, to a ribbon, square, or round tube. And in this case, I'm going to go for a square tube. I'm going to disable all these extra columns, and I can play around here with the size, so maybe a little less. And I'm also going to grab here the outer line, so double click on this line, and also here double click on this line. Then I can go here to my scaling mode and scale this up like this, and we have the ring. Now you can of course do this in other ways as well, like you could use the second input here from the sweep and create more complex sweeping, but in this case I'm just used it to a very simple case. Then here I'm going to copy this noise with baffling. So right now random noise, and let's baffle this based on the noise. And as you can see, nothing is really happening. The baffle is quite consistent, but when I increase here the angle, we can see that now we have a more random version. And I think this might be too much, so let's lower the intensity just so I have a little randomness. And also I want to change here the size. So for example, some parts are then very thin and they go wide again and they go thin again. So this is looking quite interesting here then. So this model is also done. And then the last model is a handle. And for this handle, I'm going to start out with a curve node. So place down the curve node. And I'm going to switch back to on the front view. Going to enable my grid so I see a bit where my center is. And let's use the snapping. So I'm going to create something that looks like this. Doesn't have to be exactly like this. And then enter when you're done. So we have this shape. We can also still afterwards use the edit node and then move this. Of course, I have to disable the snapping here. Then we can still move these points around if you're not happy with the result. Then here I want to make sure this is actually nicely rounded. So I'm going to select the point, hold C for my menu and go to baffling. And we can increase this as well. And now we have a more round shape here. If you don't have this menu, you can go up here and go to poly modeling menu. So every time you press C, you will have the same menu. Then I'm going to mirror this line, mirror this to the other side. And let's use a sweep node to get a shape in there. So click sweeping node, and we're going to use here the square again and see how that works. I can also see that they are not really connecting here at the bottom. So let's also take a fuse node here. The other reason why it's not connecting then is because these are two separate primitives. So I'm going to use down a poly pad node. And these are then now one primitive. So these are fully connected by one primitive. And if I now would sweep it, now I have that result. Now further down here in the sweep, let's scroll down to the roll or twist, and we can basically roll this shape into this, for example. So probably it's 45 degrees, so we have this shape. We can also play around here with the scaling, so maybe I want to lower this a bit. And if you're not happy with how it looks, you can just go here back to the edit node, and you can grab these points and still edit the shape. Like you can play around with this. Can connect this as well. So we're working in a very non-destructive and more procedural way. So then here I want to have some model here on this part as well, because right now it's open, and I'm going to use a tube for that. So place down a tube, and I'm going to set this tube to a polygon and close the gaps. And again here I'm just going to increase the number of rows and columns because I'm not focusing on creating a low poly. Then I'm also going to rotate this to, for example, to the axis I needed here. So in this case, it's going to be the x-axis. Then I'm going to bevel the edges. So I'm going to select these rings, hold C to bevel it. And now we can set the bevel amount like this. And now I want to have these nicely fitting into each other. And select everything, scale this down, and probably switch to a front view and place them like here, like this, so we can play around here a bit until it fits well. Like this. Then I could, for example, merge this. So I have this shape, so it nicely has now that part. And in here, let's just use a mirror to have this on the other side as well. And then I just create like another tube here, like this, to connect these up. So it's a handle. So I'm going to place down a tube node, and let's just set this to polygons again, close the gaps, increase the numbers used. And we need to face this in the right direction. So the x-axis in this case, scale it down. And I'm going to try to position this as much as I can within the node itself. So in this case, it's going to be like this. So it could be nice here to also make it bent, so it follows that shape a bit better. So what I can do is then here increase the rows. So maybe 11. So I have a nice one in the middle. Grab this, press T to move it, and scroll with your mouse to have a soft selection. So now I can have this little bent version, and I can increase this like this. Select everything and move it like here, so it fits nicely there. You could also here do a second tube, and this tube can then be a little bit bigger in radius. So if I would grab here my scale, I can make this a bit bigger, make it here smaller, select the middle again, and move this upwards and scroll with the mouse. And then we can load this in here, and now we have a bigger part here. Now these parts are not connected, but later on I'm going to use the voxel to make sure everything is connected. So I'm going to merge now all the metal parts. So this one, this, and this, merge them. And again, they are all in each other. So let's use a transform node. And we probably have to set again number 2. Copy the node and 4. So they all have some spacing. Then merging these together. And I noticed that these are done also maybe a bit weird. So let's use a transform here again. So move these up and rotate them like this. So we can stay more consistent with the values if you want to, like we can use 4. And so this is then the modular kit that I just had. I can also see that this model is quite small in scale. So right now I'm going to take a moment to make sure my scaling works a bit. So I'm going to increase the scale here for this model like this. So that could be better. So this is basically my high poly. So I'm going to create a normal node to make sure we have normals. And then a null node that is basically saying this is my high poly. So we can either export this or we can bake this in Houdini. Then I'm going to calculate my low poly. I'm going to use here the poly reducer. So we can plug this in. We can reduce based on percentage, but we can also go here to output specific number. And now we're going to export 1000 polygons. So this is exactly going to be 1000 or 999. There is also one more small thing I forgot, is I said I would voxel the result here. So I did not do this. So let's grab a voxel from the wood planks here and copy this here. So it's going to just take the same settings and it will voxel them with a very high smoothing on them. So maybe the smoothing is a bit too much. So let's lower the smoothing a bit. And that's okay. So now the poly reducer might have to recalculate what's going on. And now we have this result. So this is very low poly. So let's say 2500 for all of them. This does a bit better job. So you're gonna have to fine tune on what your need is. You can see that you could also lower these planks more. So a lot of geometry now is used for the planks. But what you could also do is, instead of doing a poly reduce after this, you could, for example, do 2 poly reducers, and you can then set specific reducing for planks and then specific reducing for the metal parts. So in this case, let's say the planks total should be 1000. And then let's say here, this metal parts also needs to be 1000, and then they have a little bit more topology here, so that's a bit better. So they're now evenly 1000, or you can go even lower on these planks if you want to. So this is then my low poly. Let's merge these together. We can here as well do auto unwrapping. So we can place auto UVing. We can switch here to the UV view. And this is the first layout we have. So we can have auto seams, so it's automatically going to find seams. We can play around with the tolerance values here. Or what you could also do is play around with other methods. So I recommend you going through some of these methods. They can be quite interesting to go through. But sometimes, for example, UV unwrap can also be a good job. In this case, I'm going to go with UV unwrap. We have also more features here for packing, rotation, padding, resolution, and so on. Now, once UV is calculated, most of the time I'm going to lock this node. So this means that this cannot be this cannot be recalculated again. It will always give the same result, because it can happen that if something would suddenly change up here, my UV will change, and also that means that my textures will not fit anymore. So in here we can also place down a normal node. We have the normal node or the normal soften. So this can make sure we are harden UV seams. So whenever we have a cut into UV, it will harden this into normal as well. So here, let's also grab a null node. And in here, I'm going to just call this low poly. Then we can start thinking about baking. So we can, for example, use the maps baker here in Houdini. First input will be our low poly. Second input will then be our high poly. Third input is a custom cage. Now here we have settings to where this is going to be saved, resolution, the tracing mode, previewing channel, and all the multiple maps we can export. There are of course some more advanced settings here, but by default what we want to do is just bake a normal, in this case, normal map. I also want to visualize the cage. I see it's way too much, so let's set this to 1, 0. So it's just like taking a very close look at the geometry around it. And then we're gonna press bake. Now it has been baked. And to view this best, I'm gonna use a material node. We can use the quick material or quick shade. And in here we can load in a custom texture, and I'm gonna load in my normal map. I load in my result. I can see that most of it did a great job at baking. I see little issues here, so I might go back and look into what that was. So here I tweaked a bit so we don't have that issue anymore. So the reason that would happen was because of the soft and normal node. So sometimes this can be very useful, but you can see how much impact it has on the normal map. So if I would rebake this, you can see that I will create these parts, because this might look better in game engine when this is on. But the best way to then actually see the result, which one is the best, is to actually go in game engine. So I recommend you always to then, when you bake normal map, is to actually check it in a game engine, so you are sure it works in the game engine. So further, if you want to then texture these models in Substance, I'm gonna use an FBX node. So I'm gonna plug in my geometry, give this a proper name and location, press save button to save it. If you want to export the high poly, same process, plug in the high poly, set location, export. Now further, we have our models, but I want to separate them. So what I did is I used the blast node, and in the blast node, I'm just going to select here this model, press enter, reverse selection. I'm going to use an axis line to make sure it's in the center of the world. And here it's going to say axis min. So in here it's going to take the minimum. If you want to put it in the center, then we have the pivot point perfectly in the center of this model. Then further, when you export this, you can either make the crate in game engine, or you can make the crate here in Houdini as well. You could, for example, take a duplicate node, and you can start duplicating this model like this. Like you can take a few, you can give this a rotation, so each of them have a rotation, and then you can start tweaking this as well. Like you can play around here with the position, then do another duplicate, for example, like this. Like you can duplicate this 4 times. And I'm going to go back here to my edit node, and I'm going to do it like this. So now we have, for example, another crate. So you can build with these blanks, you have crates, other models, and in this case only have extracted one piece. But of course we're going to have to extract all pieces, and then I would combine this piece and this model for on the corners here. So we can here grab this, put it in the corner, grab the duplicate node here as well, and merge these. Then I have this result. So this is a very modular way of creating multiple models with like the same set you have. So in the end, from these 6 models, you can then create these props to then decorate this level. I can even create way more than this, of course, depending on how much you need for your project. So that was it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for watching.